And we won't finish chapter 8 today, but we'll get a little real and a good chunk into it. So if we were to divide this chapter into, like my Bible divides it into 3, I think that's a pretty good division. So if we were to divide it into 3 sections, we'll look at the first one, which is the longest one here this morning. So I've called this section Deliverance Delivered. Finally, Gideon delivers Israel. There's still a lot of other things that they have to do, but finally it happens. So let's start here, verses 1 to 3, and we'll go from there. Then the men of Ephraim said to him, "What is this that you have done to us, not to call us when you went to fight against Midian?" And they accused him fiercely, and he said to them, "What have I done now in comparison with you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the grape harvest of Abiezer? Excuse me. God has given into your hands the princes of Midian, Oreb, and Zeeb. What have I been able to do in comparison with you?" Then their anger against him subsided when he said this. I don't know if you've really considered about the art of movie making. It's not a side of life I would be remotely interested, a profession I'd be remotely interested in being involved in. But I do find the how you go from a piece of paper to a multi-million-dollar movie. I just find that a fascinating process. And from what I can tell, as the amateur I am, to make a movie is a long, drawn-out disaster. So just to get it on paper. Now there's scripts everywhere, of course, but a studio has to have the rights to a character unless it's created, and then they have to get the producers and directors and actors. They have to do all this sort of stuff, and they may cast 10 people, none of them work out. They finally get their lead, and they got to get all the schedules together, and people come and go, and then they have to have the budget, and then they got to do the script, and then the studio has to come over, and then it is an absolute mess. And there are movies that, and in fact, the movie that came out, it was a big movie last year, a big surprise movie by Angel Studios about human trafficking. It's got Jim Caviezel in it. The title of it is leaving me. But that movie took decades. They had it done forever ago. It took decades for them to finally produce that thing. So you have a guy's like, okay, I've got the script, got everything. When are we going to do this? It is an absolute mess. So a movie is a lot of stop and go. A lot of stop and go. And the story of Gideon is that. Last week, we finally saw Gideon defeating the Midianites. However, the very end of the story is found here in chapter 8. So the battle, if you will, is in chapter 7. But the small details coming out of that, and then what does Israel look like after they are liberated? This is a new section in Judges. Usually what you get is Israel are bad, God judges them, God delivers them, the judge serves for 40 years and he dies. Then Israel is bad, and that's what we get. Now what we're getting that narrative, and then we say Gideon delivers them, then he reigns over them. And what we'll start to see this week and going into next week is what does that look like? And remember, the book of Judges, they get progressively worse. So Gideon is going to be worse than Deborah. And Deborah is going to be worse than Ehud. And Ehud's going to be worse than Othniel. And Samson's going to be worse than Gideon. It's just going to keep getting worse. So notice here in verses 1 to 3, the main battle is over with. And what do we get? Among the victors is the tribe of Ephraim. This is one of the mightier tribes in Israel, a big tribe. They are the ones that, as you see here, they killed a lot of the Midianites as they were fleeing. They captured the princes of the Midianites and killed them, and now they are complaining. Let me give you some insight in human nature. It doesn't matter if someone's life is good or bad, they will find a reason to complain. Because it could always be gooder. So I just came off of the best soccer team I've ever coached. They were an incredible team. I mean, it's embarrassingly good. And after every game, almost, all but like one, parents would come and say, boy, they played really good today. And I would think, yeah, but I didn't like that we weren't in the position I'd asked. I didn't like that we were giving up too many 50-50 balls. I didn't like, as I explained, that when the ball's on the weak side, I need the winger on the far side to be in position. How many balls did we give up? Like, that's where my mind goes. All coaches do that, okay? Parents have a tendency to do this with their kids. Is you see what the potential could be, and you're always pressing to get that. People are like that in general. Here, Israel's been liberated. The Ephraimites got to slaughter a lot of the Midianites, including the princes. And what is their first response to Gideon? Why didn't you call us sooner? They're going to complain. They're going to whine. I mean, this is typical of human nature. And so, before the war, you may remember that Gideon sent a call out to several of the tribes. This is in Judges 6. Here are the three that he called: Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali. You'll notice here who is missing, and that is the Ephraimites. Now, Ephraim isn't called until the end of chapter 7 to finish the war. So they weren't invited at the beginning, but they were called upon at the end of the war. For whatever reason, this is just the way it played out. Maybe Gideon didn't have their phone number. I don't know. But for whatever reason, he called on these tribes to help, but Ephraim to finish it. Now, Ephraim show up throughout Judges, and they've been a proactive group in the book so far. So Judges 3, Ehud escaped while they delayed. He passed beyond the idols and escaped to Sirah. When he arrived, he sounded the trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim. We're going to round up the troops. We get the same thing in Judges 5. Remember, this is the song of Deborah. Then down marched the remnant of the noble. The people of the Lord marched down for me against the mighty. From Ephraim, their root, they marched down the valley. So you see that they are once again involved in it. And you notice in verse 1, the men accused him fiercely at the end there of verse 1. This is an interesting word because we've come across it in the story of Gideon. It's right here in Gideon 6. You remember when God told Gideon to get rid of all the idols of Baal and Ashtaroth? And you remember that they're going to kill Gideon for doing this. And the dad says, look, I think if Baal is who you say he is, he can handle his own battles. And this is where they changed Gideon's name to Jerubbaal. So Joash, Gideon's dad, said to all who stood by him, will you contend for Baal? And here it is again. We let Baal contend against him. And the name Jerubbaal means contend with Baal. This word contend is the word accused here in chapter 8, verse 1. So that is to say that the fierceness in which Gideon vowed to war against Baal is the fierceness by which Ephraim was going after Gideon. So it's not a light verb. It's not like they had a complaint. They were very, very angry at him, felt wronged by him. And what most agree is what Ephraim is complaining about is they care more about recognition than liberation. They want to be in the center of the action so that the spotlight can fall on them. And so they wanted the credit for liberating Israel. Now you remember the whole story of Gideon at the end of chapter 6. Or does it begin in chapter 7? You remember the story of the 300. He whittles down the 300. You remember why God whittled it down to 300? Lest Israel takes credit. What is Ephraim wanting? They're wanting the credit. They're saying, well, this is all you had and you didn't call us? You should have called us. We could have beat them. Now, maybe they could have. But if Ephraim could have beat them, why didn't they do it before? Plus, let's do the math game. We'll come to the math later. But the Midianites and the Amalekites and all of them, they have over 100,000 people. With Ephraim's army, Gideon is still vastly outnumbered. And yet they think, well, had you just called us, look, we would have handled this for you. And then they would have gotten all the praise, which the whole point of the story is God liberated Israel. Not a tribe, but God did it. So God is right in whittling them down because of human nature. Now what's interesting, this will show up in the narrative, how Gideon answers them. Now imagine if you're Gideon, like you just laid the smack down on tens of thousands of people. No one thought you could do it. You are David. You just took out Goliath. In fact, he's going to finish out Goliath here in this chapter. And the first break you get is not people just, I had my doubts, but you did it. The first thing people say is, why didn't you call me sooner? Don't you know this is what we do? We're experts at this. Do you even know what you're doing? Now, I probably wouldn't handle that as well as Gideon does. Notice again what Gideon does. Is he said to them, what have I done now in comparison with you? He said, guys, I don't understand. Like, what did I do? I blew a few trumpets and lit things on fire. I didn't even have a sword on me. Our men didn't have shields. We just caused a bunch of ruckus in the middle of the night. You all are the ones that killed everybody. You see what he's doing? Is instead of saying, well, I think it's obvious why I didn't call you. I didn't need you. Right, where he's defending his honor by boasting his own pride. He defends his honor by saying, look, credit to you. Look what you guys did. This is incredible. Couldn't have done it without you. He speaks to them in such a way that it is a tough, I've learned this with middle school boys. There is a balance where you have to respect their need to have their ego stroked, but there's a limit to that. Now, this is true of men in general. Okay, ladies, hear me. This is true of men in general. You've got to let that ego be stroked a little bit, but there's a limit to it. And Gideon seems to find that balance here. And so what we see is that despite being personally attacked, Gideon handles the situation really well. In fact, he says that Ephraim, they received the leftovers. You see the illustration, the gleanings, and their victory, the harvest. So they got the real victory by killing the princes. And you remember we read Psalm 83 last week, which mentions the death of these princes. That's not what Gideon did, it's what Ephraim did. And so what we see here is Gideon modeling for us what Solomon will later describe as a soft answer turning away wrath. So you have someone who is angry at you, just spitting mad. The absolute worst thing you can do is to stir the pot. You're not going to win this battle. This is why, by the way, that whenever you have a mob, you can't reason with a mob. You can't sit down with a mob and say, let's talk this through. You can't reason with them. And when someone is so angry and bitter and enraged, your only option is to talk very little. And when you do talk, you talk softly. I had a gentleman call me some time ago. I wish I could tell you who this guy was, because it would make it for a better story. And I had never talked to this person in my life. I have no idea how he got my phone number, had never communicated with this person. But he gets my number. I'm at the house. The family, we're pulling him to the driveway. I'm going to spend the rest of the evening with him. And he just starts hollering at me. I can't believe da-da-da-da-da-da. I remember saying, I'm sorry, who are you? Who are you? Well, I'm like, oh, okay, I've heard of you. And he just went right back into it. And I remember at one point I said, can we just pause for a minute? I'd like to talk about that word you used to describe me, and I said it. It's a bit harsh, wouldn't you say? My understanding of the word is this. Is that how you would understand it? And as you've characterized me, is that accurate to what it is that you said? Because you're throwing things at me, and I just want to make sure we're on the same page. What do you mean by this? And eventually, this is another minister, by the way, eventually we were able to calm down. The temptation, and I'm not good at this stuff, so this is like the one time it worked out for me. Because what usually happens is I've got to defend my own pride and ego, my honor. And so you raise your voice. And guess what they don't do? They don't calm down. They're going to raise their voice. And then you raise your voice. And Gideon wisely says, you know what, guys, but let me tell you what it looks like from my perspective. My perspective is God used you all to do the fun stuff. We just lit torches on fire and hollered really loud with our trumpets. Look what you did. This is incredible. Bravo. Bravo. Hey, everybody. Let's honor what the Ephraimites did. We couldn't have done it without them. Everyone give them a round of applause. With that in mind, Notice where the story goes, starting in verse 4. Gideon came to the Jordan River and crossed over, he and the 300 men with him. So none of them died because, they didn't fight. Exhausted yet pursuing. So he said to the men of Succoth, please give loaves of bread to the people who follow me, for they are exhausted, and I am pursuing after Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian. There's some debate over what is the meaning of kings there, but we'll just roll with it. Because why are there two? They could be generals, could be a host of things. I don't know. And the officials of Succoth said, are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your army? Let's just pause there before we get Gideon's response, okay? Because I want you to see Gideon's response. Don't read ahead, cheater, okay? So, because you're going to know, okay, is Gideon going to come and say, well, let's reason it? No, he's not. He's not. He's going to do the exact opposite. So, Gideon's got his 300. He's dealt with Ephraim, but he's chasing down the enemy, okay? They're still around. He wants to remember, you got to cleanse Israel. This is the job of Joshua, cleanse Israel of this. And as you can imagine, they are quite exhausted. I think they've gone, somewhere in my notes, about 40 miles, something like this. For most of us, 4 miles would exhaust us. They've gone 40 miles to like Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli chasing down the Uruk-hai in Lord of the Rings. There's your reference. This word exhausted is interesting. It is not used, I think, in passing one other reference in Deuteronomy, but in terms of a narrative, it's only used one other time in the Bible thus far. It's used after Judges. It is the story of when Esau has been out hunting and he couldn't catch anything for days and he's starving. And he smells Jacob's stew, the red stuff. Remember, Esau's the red man with the red hair, and he's going to eat the red stuff. And he gives up his birthright. Remember what he says is, what good is a birthright when you're dead? And it's the word here, exhausted. It's the idea of being weary and hungry all together. Your body is at the brink of collapsing. Whenever I was running really long distances, my knees bother me. I can't do it right now. But I was running long distance. I remember one time I actually stopped at the Mead House. It was one of those days, Danny, I passed by y'all's house and probably got a water or something. So it was over 10 miles that is, one of my long run days. And I knew I was getting to the point where I was going to have to start carrying food with me. And a lot of them do chocolates, fig Newtons. You probably seen bananas and stuff. And I remember I had a mile left, and I thought I may actually collapse. Because what happens is your body has used up so much energy, it has nothing to pull from. So you have to, caffeine, chocolate, anything like that's really good. You got to put stuff in your body. Your body eventually will just stop. You're just exhausted. And that's the word that you use here. So they arrive here against 40 miles, and they're in need of provisions. And Gideon announces their needs. My men are hungry. Notice his concern is his men and not himself. Will you supply us the needs? Because when we get some food in our bellies, we're going to hunt them down. Now, this is a town that has suffered under the oppression of the Midianites and Amalekites. So you would think, hey, this is our chance. Of course, here's you some bread. And what do? They say, are the hands of these two men in your hands? Now, what do they mean by that? Basically, we still do stuff like this, and we've done it throughout history, is to prove that someone is dead, you need to prove that someone is dead. And there's a lot of ways you can do that. Native Americans used to scalp people. When Mussolini died, they hung his body for everyone to see. The Soviets still claim, the Russians still claim to have the skull of Hitler. It's morbid, I know, but this is the way humans have done this. And this shows up in the Bible. In 1 Samuel 18, there's this story. Remember, Saul tells David, I tell you what, I'll give you what you want if you go and get 100 foreskins of the Philistines. What does that prove? They're dead. That's what that proves. You're not going to get them any other way unless they're dead. We looked at something like this in chapter 1 of Judges. Adonai-Bezek fled, but they pursued him, caught him, and cut off his thumb and big toes. You remember this was because Adonai-Bezek did the same thing to his enemies. Now it's being done to him. But this is a way of saying, here is proof that we were successful. So what Succoth is saying is, look, if you prove to us they're dead, we'll give you anything you want. What is their concern? Their concern is, look, if we give in and give you some food and you don't kill these guys, they're going to come back and get us. happens throughout human history with warfare, is often innocent bystanders they get stuck right in the middle. Now remember that before Gideon with the Ephraimites, he was calm, he was gentle, he was meek, like he didn't take anything personally. But now when he's dealing with this city, it's the complete opposite. And this is a transition in the narrative. The Gideon we love and the Gideon we like not to talk about. This is where it starts in the narrative. So verse 7. So Gideon said, well then, when the Lord has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, I will flail your flesh with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars. You didn't see that one coming, did you? Verse 8, and from there they went to Peniel and spoke to them in the same way. So this is, I've got it in my notes somewhere, it's like 10 miles or something. So it's not as far, but it's, if you're tired at 40 and it's 10, give or take, you're even more tired. You're tireder. So he says the same thing at Peniel, and the men answer him the same way as Succoth did. Verse 9, he said to the men of Peniel, when I come again in peace, I will tear down this tower. This is a different Gideon, isn't it? It's a very different man. It's incredible to see it. It's so striking. I think the narrator wants us to notice this. Why is he gentle towards some and not towards others? And one of the reasons could be, against the Ephraimites, he doesn't stand a chance. Against Succoth and Peniel, he has the upper hand. One wonders if this is a game of power. Because now he's mighty Gideon, chasing down the Midianites who have been destroyed. I don't know, there's a clear change, and this is going to show up in the leadership of Gideon. Now, Peniel is an important city in the history of Israel. Peniel is where Jacob's name is changed to Israel. And so now we see this city, and it's a source of derision from Gideon. Famous Gideon. He threatens. Now, what's the importance of a tower? The tower is what keeps them safe. So this is why I think it's really a power move, because Gideon makes a threat. If they were more powerful than Gideon, they just take him out, because they're the one with the tower. And yet Gideon seems to have enough power and influence, whatever it is, that he can make this threat without fear of repercussions from them. Now, if he threatened the Ephraimites just wipe them out. They don't care. But he can act like this with these two cities. So we pick up in verse 10. Gideon and his men finally are ready to go after them. Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Kakar with their army, about 15,000 men, all who were left of all the army of the people of East, for there had fallen 120,000 men who drew the swords. That means the 300 went up against 135 soldiers. That is like less than 1%, and that's where my brain stops. You know, it's a ridiculous victory. Verse 11, Gideon went up by the way of the tent dwellers east of Nobah and Jokbeah and attacked the army, for the army felt secure. And Zebah and Zalmunna fled, and he pursued them and captured the two kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna. And he threw all the army into a panic. So what you have here is that the Midianites flee to where they assume it's safe. So in any war, there is a base. Now, you could be attacked at that base, but that is strategically located in a place that should be pretty secure. What is it, George Washington on Christmas? What turned the war was he went in on Christmas, because you don't war in Christmas. And so here, where the British thought they were safe, they were actually vulnerable. So what you have is the Midianites think, okay, we've made it beyond the Jordan, we've made it way over here. There's no way Gideon's going to come up here. And I do wonder if such a small army made the chase possible. Because, 300 men up against 15,000, you don't have much of a chance. But the 15,000 are now assuming there's no way the 300 are coming. And now they catch them, they surprise them, and they're ready to take them out. So So Karkar is east of the Dead Sea. And we're given no information about how Gideon did the attack. But regardless, the kings flee, much like Sisera fled, and there they capture them. Now remember, what does Succoth and Peniel want? They wanted proof that they were dead. But what Gideon does is he doesn't kill them, he captures them, the prisoners of war. And this is going to show up starting in verse 13. Where are we? Verse 13. Then Gideon the son of Joash returned from the battle by the ascent of Heres. He captured a young man of Succoth and questioned him, and he wrote down for him the officials and elders of Succoth, 77 men. That number is important, isn't it? 77. It's the perfect number. It's 7 twice. So what you get is Gideon, he's got his prisoners of war. He's come back victorious in battle. He's liberated these tribes from the Midianites and Amalekites. He is a hero of all heroes. And he notices a dude from the city of Succoth, a young feller. And he captures him. He says, I'm going to need something from you. Here's a piece of paper and a pen. Write down every elder of home. You see where this is going, don't you? What was the promise that Gideon had? When I come back here, victorious, I am going to let you have it. And right now, he's getting his hit list. Literally, this is a hit list. 77 people written in a notepad. And so we pick up verse 15. He came to the men of Succoth and said, Behold, Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you taunted me, saying, Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your men who are exhausted? We never found out, did they ever get bread, did we? We just dropped that part of the story. We no longer care about if they're hungry. This becomes a story about revenge. Same Gideon who spoke softly to the Ephraimites. Now he's the man of revenge. So verse 16, he took the elders of the city, he got all their names. He took thorns of the wilderness and briars, and with them taught the men of Succoth a lesson. Is this where that phrase comes from? Did your parents ever teach you a lesson? Did anybody at school teach you a lesson? I bet they did, After recess, I'm going to teach you a lesson. This is from the Bible. It's an incredible story. So he lines them up and whips them publicly. Not just with anything. I mean, I don't want briars and thorns on my back. Now, it's interesting, isn't it, that Jesus will suffer a similar punishment under the Romans. It's the cat of 9 tails, which would have been a whip with broken pieces of pottery, glass, bone, stuff like that, very sharp. And it would dig into your skin and rip everything apart that it touches. Jesus would have been mostly just exposed, his skin ripped off of him. We have stories of people who were whipped like that who died just from the whipping, to be scourged like that. So Jesus then has to carry a cross. I mean, I don't want to carry a cross and I have a swollen knee, It's pretty crazy. So this is to teach them a lesson. Now, on one end, they should trust, they should have the faith that God would liberate Israel. But what is the story of Gideon? He's the reluctant judge. He didn't have the faith to believe that God was going to liberate Israel. I mean, how many times did the story stop because Gideon was having doubts? Okay, this last time I promise. Will you make this fleece wet even though the ground's dry? Good. Next day. Okay, this is the last time I promise. Will you make it dry even though the grass is wet? Okay, this is the last time I promise. Okay? And this is the story of Gideon. And now he's mad because these people who have been under the oppression of the Midianites played it safe. Yes, they should have trusted in the Lord. I get all that. But I think we're to read this to say this is a bit of an overreaction. And then in verse 17, he goes to Peniel, and he tears down the tower, and he kills the men, I presume the elders of the city. So in one, he publicly tortures. And the other, he leaves them defenseless, and he kills a bunch of the men. Remember, this is the guy who God defeated the Midianites, and they didn't even have a sword on them. Once he goes and captures these guys, he seems rather bloodthirsty. What a radical change we get in Midian here, or Gideon. Sorry. Last part, verse 18 to 21. The scene's going to shift back. I believe this is in Gideon's home. Then he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, "Where are the men whom you killed at Tabor?" They answered, "As you are, so were they. Every one of them resembled the son of a king." And he said, "They were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if you had saved them alive, I would not kill you." Now just pause there. What in the world's going on here? What we get is that Gideon, one of the things that may have motivated him to liberate Israel was probably revenge. Vengeance. He's the Batman of the book of Judges. Now, we're not told this until now, that apparently, under the oppression of the Midianites, they had captured some of his brothers and slaughtered them. And now that he has these two so-called kings, he asks about that. What happened here? And they come out and confess. Now, imagine if you were these two guys. You were taken captive where you never thought Israelites would come visit. And fair play to them. I don't know how you did it, but you wiped us out. That's incredible. And then you watch as Gideon tortures and slaughters his own people. Do you think you have much of a chance? No. You're thinking, this guy can't be reasoned with. But this is the same guy that reasoned with the Ephraimites. So when Gideon gives them, basically puts them on public trial, they are open with information. They've got nothing to hide. They know how the story is going to end. So Gideon says, tell me, what happened at Tabor? And they say, well, we killed them. And he says, some of those guys were my brothers. The sons of my mother. And as the Lord lives, had you saved them alive, had you not just gone in and killed them, I'd probably let you live. Which is a way to say, you ain't going to live. Your own lips betray you. And we all know who you were. We all know who did this. We've been waiting for this day. And so a lot of scholars think that the scene is changing into Gideon's hometown. That he has put them up publicly. Here his father and everyone else would come, and he's going to announce, look at all that I've done. Here are the two men who have not only oppressed us, but slaughtered us unjustly. Now we get vengeance. So they confess publicly all of this, verse 20. So he said to Jether, his firstborn. We've not met this guy. Now we're going to meet another one of his sons in chapter 9, Abimelech. But here Jether, his firstborn, rise and kill them. So Gideon won't war against the Ephraimites, but he will slaughter his own people. But he wants his son. Now, why is this? Because he wants his son. We're going to see this. Gideon is the first judge to become a monarch. It's not Saul who's the first king of Israel. He's the first king of united Israel, of course. It's Gideon. And you can see Gideon saying, my firstborn, if you're going to be a great king like me, you got to get your hands dirty. This is life in the ancient world. We can go all the way back to chapter 1, and we talked about this. Israel, they do things that make them look like a Canaanite. Here's one of them. This is something a Canaanite would do. You bring your son in so that he too is bloodthirsty. But notice this, the young man did not draw his sword. He was afraid. He was still a young man. I mean, there's so many ways of reading that, isn't it? Particularly from a modern audience, it's disgusting to expose children to things they shouldn't be exposed to. Here it's violence. Nowadays it's weird sex stuff. And so it's disgusting, isn't it? And remember that you're considered an adult in the ancient world around the age of 12 or 13. So he says, I'm too young for this stuff. This isn't for me. Now, one of the reasons he's probably having his son do this is because when you are a man of honor and position, how you die is important. Ideally, you want to die in your own bed surrounded by your wives, your family, and everything else. That's the way a king wants to die. But if you're going to be killed in battle, whatever, who kills you is important. We get this in the Bible, don't we? So let's look at a few of these examples. Judges 5, where it is, remember that Yael slaughters Sisera with a nail in the head. Why is that so important? Well, you come to chapter 5, it's a woman did it. And the way she did it is that she lulled him off to sleep. That fool didn't know what was about to hit him, literally. Or consider Judges 9. This is Gideon's son, how he dies. Not Jether, Abimelech. You remember that the millstone falls on his head? He's too close to the wall. And what does he say? He wants his armor bearer to kill him, lest it be said a woman killed him. So that reminds us of the Yael story. Saul will repeat this story himself. Remember what happens is he gets hit with some arrows. You remember what he tells his armor bearer, I want you to kill me. Why? Because I don't want the Philistines to do this. It's the same story as Abimelech. There are other ones like that in the Bible. Well, so let's finish it and then we're done. Verse 21, then Zebah and Zalmunna said, rise yourself and fall upon us, for as the man is, so is his strength. So they're like, look, man, we're going to die. At least let it be the guy to beat us. Okay, let's do this the honorable way. And Gideon arose and killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and he took the crescent ornaments that were on the necks of their camels. So you see where this is going. Because now he's going to turn that into an ephod. And we'll cross that bridge next week. So what do we do with this? Okay, just two things. This is a bizarre series of events, admittedly. So I have loved Gideon. I don't like Gideon anymore, okay? I've just, to return to Gideon has been so good for me. And there's a lot of practical stuff here, but like I kind of forgot what a scoundrel he turned out to be. So he, like Saul, David, and Solomon, started out so well, but didn't finish well. Not to reference our Sunday morning series. So two things I want to point out here. The first is we should notice the change of Gideon. Thus far, we have only been told that God delivered Israel through the various judges and that they ruled. But now we see that with Gideon, we see how he's going to rule. And he is not going to rule justly. And so he has gone from a cowardly warrior to a violent overlord. And that leads to the second thing is that we become what we fear often. Gideon looks, sounds, and acts like a Midianite. What do you think the Midianites would have done had Gideon not successfully captured them at Karkar, what was it? Whatever, east of Dead Sea. They would have done to him exactly what Gideon does to their two kings. Same thing. He would have had a show trial publicly. He would have slaughtered them publicly. And anyone who helped Gideon along the way, they would have tortured and killed. Gideon is acting like a Canaanite. He's acting like a Midianite. And so here is a guy who lived under the oppression of the Midianites, and the minute he gets a taste of that power, he abuses it. So he is diplomatic with one tribe, but violent towards cities he is more powerful than. He is becoming the very thing God is liberating Israel from. This is why Judges is a roller coaster. Because you can take Israel out of Egypt, but it's hard to get the Egypt out of Israel. You can take the Midianites out of Israel, but it's hard to get it out of their hearts. That's the hard part of the Christian journey, is that we can outwardly profess faith. The hard part is that transformation in the hearts. And Gideon looks and sounds and talks and acts like a Midianite. And this will be his downfall. But here's the good news. God still uses, this is the story of Judges, he still uses broken people to do incredible things. He still uses blind people to accomplish his will. God is going to liberate Israel because of his covenantal promises, even if it requires using people like this little scoundrel. So we should celebrate Gideon when he's good. We should confront him when he's not so good. And here we see him go from one to the other. Handle conflict the way good Gideon did. Don't handle it the way bad Gideon did. And the difference is what's in your heart. Well, Danny, we miss anything? This is good stuff. So maybe next week we'll finish Gideon. And it's not good news. I'm sorry. Chapter 9, not good news. Like, I've already spoiled it. It's up there. And his son dies tragically as this violent overlord. Chapter 10's not good. Sorry. Chapter 11, Jephthah, the son of a harlot, not really good. He liberates them. The story is terrible. We get to Samson. It's a fun story. It ends triumphantly, but a lot of tragedy leading there. All right. Well, okay, we're going to get out on time. Carrie, you close us in prayer?